Hello, friends. I'm sure we're all getting excited that we're finally getting into late winter and early spring now. It has been nice having a break during the last couple months, but the garden's starting to wake up now, and it's a good time to finish planting our gardens and getting ready for the new season. For a lot of us, depending on where you live, it's still way too early to be doing very much outside. The weather's just too unpredictable. Just when you think it's about to warm up, you're hit with another blast of winter and everything gets covered up again. And we've gone through some pretty harsh stuff just in the last few weeks. But that's okay. We're not going to let that stop us. We can make great use of this time to get a lot of our seeds going indoors. And I want to show you one of my favorite methods for starting them. I know there are many ways to do this, but this one's good because you can get the seed germinating and growing without even getting your hands dirty. That's because we're not going to use any soil, at least not yet. In fact, you'll be able to get a lot of your garden started now, and it can all be done in one small container. In an earlier video, though, I showed you one way that many gardeners often use. It's easy, and they have a lot of success with it. Again, with this one, there's no soil to start with, just some paper towels. By simply wrapping the seeds in a few layers and keeping them damp, you can get your seeds germinated with hardly any effort. It's a good technique and it works well. Usually until this happens to you. If you forget to check and leave them too long, the roots will keep spreading and work themselves into the fibers of the paper towel, even growing right through it. You can quickly end up with a real tangled mess. Very difficult to separate, and pulling them out if you're not careful, you can easily snap their stems, and then they're not going to survive. Now, in that video, I did show you how to work through that problem and still separate them. It was slow going, but we did manage to save most of them. They were all twisted and distorted, but after getting them properly transplanted, they all turned out just fine. So if you're doing it this way, be sure to check that out. I'll leave a link at the end of this video and in the description. But the technique I want to share now is going to avoid this problem. It is the same as a paper towel method, but with one huge improvement. We're going to use fabric instead. But not just any scrap cloth that you can find around the house. It needs to have certain qualities. All these here, these would give us problems. When you're scouting around, you have to keep in mind these three things. First, it needs to have a very tight weave that won't stretch. The denser the better. That'll stop the roots from working themselves through to the other side. And if there's any elasticity, you'll be sure the roots will take advantage of that and dig right in. The second is that it can't be thick. You're looking for something that has practically no pile or nap, or as short as possible. That's the raised fuzzy surface some fabric can have. Something thick might hold more moisture for the seedlings, but the roots can easily attach to those fibers. This old cloth still has a very slight nap to it. I would use this if I couldn't find anything else, but don't go any thicker. The third point is that it should be a darker color to give some contrast against the white roots. It's not completely necessary, but you'll see that it's definitely easier to spot the seeds when they first germinate. Much better than using those paper towels. For me, one excellent cloth I found is this old summer dress shirt. It meets all the criteria, and it'll work great. All we have to do now is cut it up into a bunch of usable pieces. And they don't have to be perfect, just some rough squares or rectangles. Make each side about 6 to 8 inches or 15 to 20 centimeters. I did cut away the buttons and cuffs and collar. We don't need those to get in the way. Working on this shirt may be a little more cumbersome than just cutting up an old sheet, but it's a good way to recycle your old clothing. And you don't have to make new pieces every year, because you'll be able to use these squares over and over again for many seasons. From this one shirt, I was able to get about 15 good pieces. So now we have enough to get a good start on the garden. It's always best to moisten the pieces before you add the seeds. Some fabric can be a little resistant to absorb water at first, but once you run them under the tap and give them a good soaking, that's usually enough. They'll retain the water after that. Just squeeze out the excess so they're just damp though. We don't want them dripping wet. So now I can show you how fast and easy it can be to start really hundreds of seeds. I've got a few types of peppers here, both hot and sweet, and several tomato varieties to try. First, sprinkle them out. If you leave them with a little separation, it'll help to spot them better later when they germinate. And it'll give the roots a little room to grow if you need to leave them in there for a few extra days. Although the fabric is damp, it helps to spray some water on the seeds now to keep them in place while you fold the fabric over. Press them down to squeeze out any air pockets because the seeds need to make good contact with the fabric so they can start drawing on that moisture. We'll give this same treatment to all the seeds. It goes pretty quick. Lay them out. Give them a little spray. Fold it over to lock them in. And don't forget to label them. Since a lot of the seeds look the same in this batch, you don't want to take the chance of getting them all mixed up. You might be asking, what is the point of this? Why not just plant the seeds in soil from the start? Well, here's why I do it this way. If you've been keeping some older seed and you're not quite sure if it's still good, you'll know much faster with this method if the seeds are going to germinate or not. If you were to simply plant them in soil, I can guarantee that you'll be waiting much longer to see any signs of growth. And if the seed truly is bad, you could waste 2 weeks or more waiting for the seedlings to appear and then just end up having to start all over again. But the big reason I like this method is if I've been too busy with other things and haven't had a chance to prepare my potting soil or get the flats ready or set up an area where I'm going to raise the seedlings, I haven't lost any time. I've still gotten all my seeds started. It was quick, no mess, and they're just sitting on the counter now waiting to germinate. It's a real time saver, and it's given me a little breathing room now to get everything ready and not be so rushed. And then later, as they start to germinate, I'll be ready then to move them over to the flats and get them properly planted. As with the paper towel method, the fabric always has to stay damp, so keep them covered. And whenever you open it to check on them, you can give it a spray if you feel the pieces are starting to dry out. The seeds also need to be kept warm to germinate, but nothing elaborate. Room temperature is just fine. I keep mine on the kitchen counter and they've always done well. Just don't leave it in a spot that gets direct sunlight. It can heat up very quickly like this one here. Too much longer and these seeds will get cooked and you'd have to start all over again. So just check on them every day to see how well they're doing. The dark color really does help with this because you'll easily spot which seeds have sprouted, no matter how short or fine their roots are. But here's the real reason for the fabric. It's much more forgiving than the paper towels. If you're forgetful and don't check on their progress for a few days, or even if you just want to be a little lazy, the seedlings will be completely safe. These are some tomatoes that germinated several days ago. I really should have planted them earlier. They're obviously a little tangled and intertwined and even stuck to the cloth, but there's no problem with this at all. We'll be able to save every one of these. Now, at first, it may look like we have the same problem we had with paper towels, but no, it's not even close. These have not grown through the cloth at all. The roots form microscopic hairs, and with those, they've just slightly attached themselves. All we have to do is gently peel them off. With a little coaxing, they can all be separated. I'm setting them off to the side because we're going to plant them next. You've got time, but don't leave them exposed to the air too long. The roots can dry out, and that could hurt their chances for a successful transplant. If you need more than 10 minutes to get them planted, give them a spray to keep them moist or cover them with a damp cloth. Even if they get all clumped together like this, if you take your time, you can pull them apart without causing any damage. Make sure not to pinch them or stretch them. I know I keep throwing out all these warnings, but it's really pretty easy. And now, with them all separated, we're ready to plant. Now, if you've been watching my other videos, you'll know my favorite tool I use is a Japanese-style chopstick. It's easy to handle, it has a nice taper without being too sharp. I find it's just a great tool to use whenever you're working around seedlings. So the easiest and quickest way I've always planted them is to first lay them down on the surface. And with this method, the soil always has to be moist and completely loose. It can't have any compaction at all. Otherwise, as we plant them, they could get crushed or pinched and simply won't survive. Carefully press down on the middle of the root and push it gently into the soil. It'll bend as it gets dragged down, and that's okay. They may be fragile, but they're tough enough to handle this. You can always use a tool to fluff up the soil a bit if you feel it's not loose enough, and then push on the seedling. And don't be too concerned if you bury the leaves a little. As the plant quickly recovers, the stem will push those leaves back up. Sometimes you have to wrestle with it a bit, but just make sure the entire root gets covered. There, so these are now planted, and in a day or two they'll recover and emerge just fine. I use this fabric method every spring, and it's always helped me to keep the garden on track. Give this a try and let me know in a comment on how great it worked for you. Thanks for watching, and when you garden well, you'll always eat well.